Typical medieval portrayals of the crucifixion show the nails in the palms, but the palms wouldn't support the weight of the body in comparison to the violence that you see all over the rest of the body.
For centuries, a simple piece of linen has baffled both believers and skeptics alike. This ancient cloth, bearing the faint but unmistakable image of a crucified man, has defied every conventional explanation. No paint, no brush strokes, no known artistic method can account for its creation. What if a breakthrough in modern genetics now reveals secrets hidden deep within its fibers?
That transforms and leaves a lasting mark on the cloth. And so the shroud is believed to be a holy relic because you don't get much more holy than the actual blood of Jesus.
Could the traces of DNA preserved there transform our understanding of history and uncover new insights about this relic? The clues woven into its threads may finally expose a story that stretches across continents and 2 millennia. The shroud's enigmatic image. For centuries, the Shroud of Turin has captivated imaginations with its haunting image of a man who appears to have suffered a violent death. Unlike any painting or artwork, this faint figure is impressed on a simple piece of linen, its details baffling scientists and believers alike. What makes it extraordinary is not only the image itself, but how it behaves. It acts like a photographic negative, revealing a clear, detailed face when exposed to early photography techniques. This phenomenon first stunned the world in 1898, when a pioneering photographer named Secondo Pia captured the shroud during a rare public exhibition. Pia's photographic plates revealed a startling clarity unseen by the naked eye. The face that emerged had distinct features: a damaged nose, closed eyes, a split beard, and bruises, hinting at brutal wounds. It looked human in a way that defied simple description, both serene yet marked by suffering. This was no ordinary stain or artistic rendering. It carried depth and three-dimensional qualities resembling a hologram or even an X-ray image. Such properties challenged centuries of assumptions about the shroud's origin and raised profound questions about the method behind its creation. One of the most puzzling aspects is how the image's negative nature could have formed. The medieval period, often proposed as the time of its creation by skeptics, had no understanding of photographic negatives or image reversal. The human eye and brain do not generally process visual information as negatives, and artists of that era lacked the technologies or concepts to reproduce such an effect intentionally. This fact alone has fueled debates about whether the cloth could truly be a medieval forgery or something far older and more mysterious. Moreover, the image's detail is subtle and microscopic, residing only on the top layers of the fabric's fibers. No paint, ink, or dyes have been found, despite decades of intense examination. The staining is not the result of brush strokes, but rather appears as a chemical modification of the linen's surface. Attempts to recreate the image using known medieval artistic techniques consistently fall short, deepening the puzzle about how such a precise and complex imprint could have originated. Over time, researchers used ultraviolet light, infrared imaging, and laser scanning to peek at the shroud in this almost unprecedented detail. Each approach seemed to uncover fresh facets, but somehow never arrived at that one definitive explanation. The image's three-dimensional intensity also changes depending on the cloth-to-body distance, which is kinda not something you see in traditional art. That detail makes people think the shroud isn't just a picture, but more like a record of an event, sort of a snapshot kept in place, and somehow etched by an unknown process. No clear author. The shroud's position as a relic and religious symbol has meant it's been examined from multiple angles, and not gently either. Some folks have dismissed it as a really clever hoax, while others treat it as a sacred object with supernatural sources. Still, because science can't fully close the case, it pushes a rethink of both sides, the "it's fake" camp and the "miracle" camp. The mystery stays open, and every investigation peels away layers of history and material science without ever giving the complete story. Even so, the first shock, mainly the image's photographic negative quality, set the whole tone for later, deeper inquiries. That one finding moved the shroud from being just a religious oddity to something researchers might treat like a forensic and genetic puzzle. So the conversation, it widened beyond faith alone into the zone of empirical clues. The question flipped from, is it real, to how could an image like this exist at all, and what hidden secrets are woven into its threads? Now, as we sit with this enigma of the image itself, the scene is ready to explore the technologies that brought new light to this ancient fabric and the surprising discoveries they've made possible. Transitioning from this mysterious image, the scientific tools now applied have transformed the shroud from a religious artifact into a complex biological and chemical puzzle awaiting answers. Scientific tools cover new clues. Modern science has revolutionized the study of the Shroud of Turin, shifting its examination from the metaphysical into rigorous forensic and genetic inquiry. Advanced technologies like DNA sequencing, spectroscopy, and high-energy physics now enable researchers to peer into the fabric with unprecedented precision. This evolution transforms the shroud into a biological archive, preserving microscopic clues that chronicle centuries of contact and history. Particularly groundbreaking has been the application of next-generation sequencing technology, which allows scientists to extract and analyze DNA samples hidden deep within the cloth's fibers. This is no small feat, as the fabric is nearly 2,000 years old and has been handled by countless individuals. To avoid modern contamination, researchers use sterile micro-vacuum devices that gently collect dust, pollen, skin cells, and organic material lodged between the tightly woven threads, preserving these minute biological signatures. X-ray and laser scanning techniques add another layer of detail, probing the linen's internal fiber structure and elemental composition. By studying the molecular patterns of bloodstains at the nanoscale, scientists uncover not just surface markings, but biochemical evidence of trauma, casting new light on the shroud's human story. It is through these interdisciplinary methods that the artifact becomes less a sacred relic and more a case file demanding forensic analysis. This approach has yielded startling insights that challenge earlier assumptions. For example, the complex chemical makeup of the bloodstains disproves the idea that they are merely pigments or paint. Instead, they show markers of severe physical distress, biological signs consistent with conditions like dehydration, muscle breakdown, and shock. Such findings suggest that the individual wrapped in the shroud endured intense suffering before death. For decades, some experts kept saying the shroud was basically a medieval creation, but lately, these more advanced tools are starting to mess with that story a bit. Scientists are now finding traces of tiny pollen and other biological material, and it all seems to point well beyond Europe. The signals suggest connections across the Middle East, North Africa, and even as far out as Asia. That sort of geographic variety, hidden down at the microscopic level, would be almost impossible for a medieval artisan to copy or make on purpose, even with a lot of intention. And then there are tools like wide-angle X-ray scattering, which can look at linen degradation like a kind of molecular timer. In practice, this means comparing the shroud's fibers with fibers from fabrics that are known from older periods, including ancient and medieval samples. What's coming out of those comparisons is fresh, and it keeps leaning toward an origin that could predate the medieval time frame. In other words, it fits more closely with first-century textiles than with later manufacturing. So yeah, debates that many people thought were quietly closed a generation ago are getting reopened again. With genetics, chemistry, and physics all pulling together, the shroud is starting to look like a layered record, not just a surface artifact. It seems to hold secrets inside and out, not only in the visible image, but also in the unseen biological traces that somehow survived through centuries. This mix of science and history is helping reconstruct a path that goes far beyond the cloth's more recent provenance, if that makes sense. Getting a handle on these methods and what they've revealed is important too, because it clarifies why this relic doesn't fit neatly into easy explanations. The shroud isn't only a religious symbol or just an artwork. It's more like a complicated archive, recording centuries of human history right in its fabric. But at the same time, each discovery also adds new questions, which keeps the mystery alive and sets you up for even more surprising findings underneath its surface. As the veil of doubt begins to lift with scientific scrutiny, the DNA hidden in the fibers tells a story far more tangled and global than anyone anticipated. Complex DNA findings. The most astonishing revelation from the Shroud's recent scientific examination is the discovery of complex DNA signatures embedded within its threads. Far from a single source, the genetic material reveals a cacophony of lineages linking people from across the ancient world. This intricate mixture challenges the long-standing idea that the cloth was a European medieval forgery painted to deceive. Researchers utilized mitochondrial DNA analysis, focusing on genetic markers inherited maternally, which survive better in ancient samples. Over lengthy testing periods, they extracted millions of nucleotide sequences from microscopic dust and biological deposits trapped within the fibers. The resulting data mapped a bewildering array of haplogroups, distinct genetic lineages, originating from diverse regions including the Middle East, Europe, North and East Africa, South Asia, and even East Asia. The presence of Middle Eastern haplogroups was not surprising, given the Shroud's association with Jerusalem and early Christian history. Particularly notable were markers linked to the Druze, an isolated ethno-religious community whose genetic pool has remained largely unchanged for thousands of years. This connection lends credibility to the theory that the cloth may have originated or at least spent significant time in that region. Equally compelling, however, were genetic groups traced to Western Europe, reflecting the Shroud's documented presence from the 15th century onward. These European markers likely result from centuries of handling by clergy, nobility, and pilgrims. The DNA footprint thus builds a layered narrative of ongoing human contact rather than a singular origin. More surprising were the signals coming out of North and East Africa, with markers pointing toward ancient Egyptian and Ethiopian populations, kind of like the data was quietly agreeing with older narratives. This thread suggests that the cloth passed through or had some kind of contact with early Christian communities on the African continent, which is a detail that was previously overlooked in a lot of the historical reconstructions, frankly. Even more unexpected were the South Asian and East Asian genetic markers, usually linked with regions in India and China. Given that international trade and contact during medieval Europe were limited in scope and scale, these results really put the forgery theory under serious pressure. Hard to picture a 14th century artisan acquiring or deliberately embedding such diverse and far-flung DNA signatures with that modern-like precision, you know. Scientists posit that the Shroud functioned like a silent traveler, carrying traces of people who encountered it over centuries, from Jerusalem through trading hubs and pilgrimage routes all the way to Europe. This cumulative layering of biological evidence gives a complex portrait of human movement, devotion, and history, encoded literally in the threads themselves. Far from being random contamination, the genetic mosaic actually strengthens the case for the Shroud's antiquity and for its broad geographical journey. It starts to look less like some one-off forged object and more like a collective biological record, a genetic snapshot of humanity's diverse touchpoints. That more nuanced picture, it basically forces a re-evaluation of what the Shroud stands for and how it witnessed history across continents and through long stretches of time. The extraordinary journey embedded in its DNA naturally leads us to consider the historical route that could have brought such diverse influences together on one sacred cloth. The Shroud's ancient journey. The surprising breadth of genetic traces found on the Shroud suggests it wasn't confined to one place or one time, but instead undertook a remarkable journey across regions and centuries. Researchers noticed a striking alignment between the distribution of these genetic markers and a historical path long considered more legend than fact, the route of the Mandylion, an image traditionally linked to the early Christian world. This journey is thought to have begun in Jerusalem, a city intimately connected to the events the Shroud is believed to represent. From Jerusalem, the cloth reportedly traveled to Edessa, modern-day Şanlıurfa in Turkey, where it remained hidden for centuries. Edessa was a vital crossroads in the ancient world, intersecting trade routes and cultural exchanges between East and West. Caravans from China, India, Persia, and Arabia regularly passed through, carrying silk, spices, pilgrims, and diplomats. Such diverse traffic offers a plausible explanation for the blend of genetic material deposited on the Shroud over time. Later, The shroud moved to Constantinople around the 10th century, entering the heart of the Byzantine Empire. This city was a bustling metropolis where people of many races, cultures, and religions converged. The shroud's presence there exposed it to countless individuals, each potentially leaving microscopic traces, skin cells, sweat, or pollen, that became part of the cloth's silent history. The political and religious significance of Constantinople made it a fitting resting place for such a sacred relic. In 1204, Constantinople was ravaged during the Fourth Crusade, leading to the shroud's disappearance from historical records for a time. Accounts place the relic next in Athens and regions of Greece before it resurfaced in France around 1353, linked to a French knight named Geoffrey de Charny. This timeline closely matches the known European history of the cloth and offers a transition point from its Eastern origins to Western custodianship. This long voyage through different empires and cultures would have exposed the shroud to a myriad of human contacts. Each encounter possibly added another layer of the genetic and botanical evidence that sits in its fibers. The shroud, rather than being a static artifact, it sort of acted like a traveler through history, carrying the invisible footprints of whoever handled it or even venerated it. The complexity of its journey messes up earlier assumptions that the shroud was just a medieval European creation. The broad DNA diversity and ancient pollen samples don't really agree with the idea that the cloth story began only in France or Italy. Instead, this evidence points toward a relic whose narrative spans continents and stretches across millennia, showing the rich interconnections of old civilizations. As historians and scientists put the root back together, the shroud starts looking like a living witness of human movement across religious, cultural, and economic boundaries. The tangled threads of genetics and history braid into a narrative that feels both survival-oriented and transmission-driven through turbulent times. All of this shows how an object can become a kind of storage place not only for spiritual meaning, but also for very real physical traces, preserving echoes of the people and the places it brushed against. Yet, the biological record, especially the plants locked inside the linen, adds one more angle to this unusually extraordinary story. The botanical evidence found on the shroud deepens the geographic linkages and offers a biological map that complements the genetic trail etched into its fibers. Botanical evidence and geographic fingerprints. Pollen analysis reveals a remarkable botanical signature embedded in the shroud, one that mirrors and amplifies the genetic story of its passage across diverse landscapes. Expert palynologists scrutinized microscopic pollen grains trapped deep within the linen fibers. Samples so finely preserved, they offer a window into the environments the cloth encountered over centuries. The findings span a wide spectrum of plant species with surprising geographic distribution. Of the 58 species identified, 17 are native to various parts of Europe, which fits naturally with the shroud's documented presence on that continent for the past several hundred years. Yet the vast majority of pollen derived from plants originating in the Middle East, Turkey, and the Anatolian steppe, corresponding closely to the ancient trade routes and cities known as the shroud's waypoints. This dual signature reinforces the idea of the shroud's long and complex journey from east to west. Among the most striking botanical clues is the unexpected dominance of pollen from a thorny desert shrub known as Gondelia tourneforti. Found almost exclusively in a narrow area between Jerusalem and Jericho, this plant's pollen constituted nearly half of all samples recovered. Historical accounts connect this finding to the biblical narrative, where Roman soldiers fashioned a crown of thorns for Jesus. Gondelia's long, rigid, needle-like thorns align perfectly with such a crown's description. The timing is also significant. This plant blooms around early spring, coinciding with Passover, the period during which the crucifixion is traditionally believed to have occurred. The pollen's concentration near the shroud's head and shoulder regions strengthens the connection between the plant and the relic's story. Additional botanical samples revealed pollen from Ziziphus spina Christi and other species native to the Judean Desert and Sinai Peninsula, areas closely linked to the shroud's proposed origins. These regional floral markers serve as geographic fingerprints, extremely difficult to fake or replicate, especially since pollen behaves very differently than pigments. It cannot be simply painted or artificially applied without microscopic detection. The The presence of this authentic environmental evidence seriously challenges theories of medieval forgery. A craftsman in 14th century France would have had no practical means of acquiring or embedding pollen from plants exclusive to the Middle East, much less integrating them at such microscopic levels throughout the cloth. While paint can be forged, these botanical signatures act like natural barcodes, pointing back to very specific locations. Botanical and genetic data together form a multidimensional map, one that chronicles the shroud's exposure to particular landscapes and populations over time. These living remnants of dust and pollen make the fabric a unique historical archive, bridging biology and archaeology. Each grain provides a piece of the puzzle, silently testifying to the cloth's extraordinary odyssey. This botanical evidence also invites a more expansive reflection on how artifacts carry the environmental and human histories of their travels. The shroud becomes a natural repository for geographical and biological memory, preserving a legacy far beyond human sight or intent. From these botanical clues, the investigation naturally moves toward examining the blood traces, chemical and biological messages etched into the shroud by suffering and trauma. Blood chemistry reveals trauma. The reddish stains on the Shroud of Turin have long been a subject of intense debate, but recent scientific advances have transformed our understanding of their nature. Detailed chemical analyses, including transmission electron microscopy and Raman spectroscopy, revealed that these marks are not paint or pigment, but genuine human blood. The blood was identified as type A, a relatively rare group today but consistent with findings from other ancient Christian relics, such as the Sudarium of Oviedo. What sets this blood apart is its biochemical composition, which carries unmistakable markers of severe physical trauma. Elevated levels of creatinine and ferritin bound to hemoglobin indicate conditions linked to extreme bodily stress and muscle breakdown. Such markers are common in rhabdomyolysis, a medical condition where damaged muscles release harmful substances into the bloodstream following intense injury. These findings align closely with historical accounts of brutal scourging and crucifixion. The chemistry of the blood stains further suggests repeated and extreme violence, consistent with the more than 100 scourge marks described by some researchers. These biochemical signals point to a victim who endured prolonged suffering, dehydration, and shock before death. This level of detail in the blood chemistry is impossible to replicate through painting or forgery, reinforcing the authenticity of the physical trauma recorded in the fabric. Another fascinating aspect involves the unusual reddish color of the blood, which has resisted the darkening that typically occurs in ancient bloodstains. Scientists suggest that high bilirubin levels, produced during severe trauma and liver distress, may have preserved the bright color over centuries. This biochemical anomaly adds yet another layer of complexity to the shroud's storied history. The discovery that the blood is real and chemically consistent with a violent end throws a wrench into a lot of skeptical ideas that once brushed the stains off as artist pigment or just symbolic markings. Instead, it seems to indicate a cloth that actually bore witness to human anguish and death, not a metaphor, not theater. And these kinds of findings start to link lab work with the older descriptions of crucifixion episodes that were written down roughly 2,000 years ago. On top of that, the forensic look of the blood sorta opens fresh pathways, where biology, chemistry, and history can sit in the same room, so to speak, and sketch a more complex picture of where the shroud came from. This makes the whole thing feel even more baffling because the physical proof seems to lean towards certain traditional stories, yet it also brings up new puzzles, like how such careful biological traces could survive in that state. Some researchers have pointed out that the blood's biochemical pattern suggests the victim was in shock and maybe had organ failure before death. Those conditions are rarely, if ever, something you can actually read in ancient remains. Taken together, the detailed forensic signatures imply a person who did not die in an instant, but after a longer and truly brutal sequence of suffering, and that detail oddly matches the gospel retellings of Jesus' crucifixion. Even so, the origin of the blood and the identity of the individual remain hotly debated. Still, the chemical evidence that has been logged from the shroud makes it hard to ignore a possible connection between the artifact and the historical figure of Jesus. These insights into the bloodstains lead naturally to another critical scientific pillar, the dating of the cloth itself, which has sparked its own controversies and challenges. Radiocarbon dating under scrutiny. The dating of the Shroud of Turin has been a contentious issue since the late 20th century, beginning with the radiocarbon tests conducted in 1988. Laboratories at Oxford, Zurich, and Arizona dated the cloth to between 1260 and 1390 AD, suggesting a medieval origin. This conclusion was long accepted by many as definitive proof that the shroud was a forgery produced during the Middle Ages. However, further research raised significant doubts about the validity of this dating. Investigations revealed that the sample used for the carbon tests came from a heavily handled corner of the cloth, an area likely subject to medieval repairs. Raymond Rogers, a chemist involved in shroud research, found evidence of cotton fibers woven into linen at the tested site. Fibers dyed to match the original cloth. This mixture suggested contamination and replacement that could skew radiocarbon results drastically. Such contamination turns the carbon dating into a sampling problem rather than a conclusive measurement of the entire artifact. The carbon tests may have dated a repaired fragment rather than the original 1st century linen. This discrepancy revitalized debates over the shroud's true age and authenticity, challenging assumptions established over 3 decades ago. In response to these controversies, scientists began exploring alternative methods less vulnerable to surface contamination. One promising approach is wide-angle X-ray scattering, or WAXS, introduced in 2022 by physicist Liberato Di Caro. This technique examines the internal crystalline structure of the linen fibers, which changes predictably over time due to radiation, humidity, and temperature exposure. When you line up the shroud's linen structure with that of other known ancient and medieval fabrics, WAXS gives you a kind of built-in molecular clock that doesn't care much about surface dirt, or at least that's what the method is aiming for. It's kind of wild, too, because Di Caro's work seemed to point toward a tighter match between the shroud and 1st century textiles from places like Masada in Israel, rather than the medieval European samples. In practice, that result kind of reopens the possibility that the cloth could be quite a bit older than people had been assuming. Still, there's the whole issue that you cannot just trust one technique and call it a day. The reliance on several complementary dating methods shows how hard it is to pin down the shroud's age precisely. Radiocarbon dating is still a big deal, of course, but in this case, its limits have pushed researchers toward wider, more holistic studies that factor in things like contamination and degradation effects, even when they're subtle or messy. None of this completely erases the medieval timeline, but it does add enough uncertainty to keep the question genuinely open. It also makes it easier to have a broader conversation about how objects like the shroud should be examined, by respecting both material complexity and the historical weight of what we think we're looking at. From doubts about age, the focus naturally turns to the elusive process that created the image itself, an enigma still beyond complete scientific understanding. The unsolved mystery of image formation. The Shroud of Turin continues to puzzle scientists, largely because of the enigmatic image on its surface. Unlike a painting, the figure exists only on the topmost fibers, within a depth of roughly 200 nanometers, with no pigment, ink, or brushwork. This unique property challenges all known artistic methods. High-resolution imaging reveals that the image carries 3-dimensional information. The intensity corresponds to the distance between the body and cloth, producing depth and texture like a primitive hologram. Such a feature suggests an interaction beyond any medieval technique or natural staining. Some researchers propose that a really intense, sudden burst of energy might have triggered chemical shifts that eventually shaped the image. It's still speculative, but this idea sort of nudges at processes that modern science hasn't fully mapped yet, pointing toward extraordinary things happening in a way we don't see often. Other environmental clues lean toward an origin in the Jerusalem region, during spring, right around Passover. Microscopic soil and pollen, mixed with biochemical markers of injury, build this strange riddle that stretches across biology, chemistry, archaeology, and physics all at once. People have tried to recreate the image using chemical approaches, corona discharge setups, or even electromagnetic pulses. But nothing has really worked. No trial has managed to reproduce the fine detail, the multi-layered structure, or the apparent 3D characteristics. Some commentators even suggest it could reflect a one-time instant event, maybe matching stories about death or resurrection. That said, it starts brushing against metaphysical territory. The physical findings basically insist on an unknown process, able to leave a durable imprint. In the end, the shroud sits between faith and science, almost like a boundary line that no one can easily step over. Skeptics keep pushing for replication, but many researchers admit that standard methods can't yet account for the image. After decades of work, from DNA sequencing to pollen analysis and blood chemistry checks, the material keeps showing up as a relic with major historical and biological weight. The Shroud of Turin remains one of humanity's most compelling mysteries, where science peels back old layers while revealing new questions. Its story is woven through centuries of history, biology, and faith, inviting us to explore the unknown. If you found this journey fascinating, please like and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's greatest enigmas. And don't miss the next video queued up on your screen. It promises to uncover even more astonishing secrets.